A white couple purposely adopts black children to make them slaves. Yes, I said it. Purposely adopts them with the sole intention in mind to make them slaves. You don't believe me? Watch the video.
Case out of West Virginia where a couple is facing charges after some of their adopted children were found locked in a shed living in deplorable conditions. Jean Whitefeather and Donald Lance are accused of adopting 5 kids from a shelter, targeting them for forced labor specifically because of their race. The sheriff's office says they found some of the children in October locked inside a barn during a welfare check at the couple's home. The 2 children told authorities they had been inside the small room for about 12 hours when they were found. Neighbors reported that the children were also forced to perform farm labor and were not allowed inside the home. Chief Legal Analyst Khalif Rhodes joins us now. Khalif, this is just a horrible case of neglect, just wretched what these children went through. But let's talk about the charges that this couple faces.
I mean, you're talking about kidnapping. You're talking about, well, let's go back. Disgusting. I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind. When I first looked at this story, it was like, am I really reading this? Is this a parody? Like, what is actually happening?
A lot of people are going to say, this is just one instance. No, stuff like this has happened before. But one instance is too many. One time is too many. Okay? But this isn't the first time that this has happened. So when people raise the question, why are white people allowed to adopt black children? It has relevance. It has context. It has meaning. Just like the one guy tried to say, well, why does so many black kids need to be adopted? And the one woman, because the one woman made the video saying, why do white people want to adopt black kids? People say that because of stuff like this. So don't get defensive. Give us an answer. Give us an answer. Why is this allowed to happen? And why are you, by not being outraged, basically defending it?
But yeah, the trafficking of human trafficking is the number one thing. Child abuse, neglect. It runs the gamut of anything, the worst of the worst that you can think about. This didn't just start in West Virginia. It actually started in Washington. They were under investigation in Washington and moved to West Virginia. Sold both of those properties. The attempt to try to pay their bond. They had a $400,000 combined bond. The judge was like, nope, too much. We'll figure something out. We'll make it $500,000 for each of you all. And they kept that money. And they said, because this property was used in the commission of this crime, we believe now it's turned into contraband. And so you can't even get your money back. We'll hold that money until this case is resolved. And if this money goes anywhere, it should go to those children. I mean, this is just absolutely disgusting for sure.
So, I mean, do they face any charges of slavery? Because we mentioned that they supposedly adopted these kids for that purpose.
That would be the neglect. That would be the child abuse. That would be the human trafficking.
You're not going to see that spelled out.
You wouldn't. But what you would see is if it was based on race, you could now open the door for the hate crime charges. That's where you'll see that. And if West Virginia is one of the states that doesn't have it, which is only a handful that don't, what you will see is the federal government will step in. So when you connect the race, that was the number one factor for motivating you to do this charge, that's when the hate crime will come in, and then this charge will be elevated for sure. So that's why the race was involved specifically. And obviously the investigators know more than we know, because they're saying they individually target these kids based on their race. And so it had to be text messages, phone calls, something that they know more than just they'd had this adopted group of 5 kids.
You would think that with all the checks and balances in the adoption agency's process, that something would have come up. But just the couple, you said that they were, under investigation in another state, Washington, I believe.
Correct.
And then moved to a completely different state, probably to avoid those charges. Does that all play into the severity of their charges? Is that difficult to prove intent there?
Taking folks across state lines, also another charge. That's where you'll have that human trafficking component. When you take someone from one location to another location against their will, that's where you'll have that. But what I can say is, you get these kind of weird cases. As a criminal defense attorney, I get cases all the time, and I'm like baffled and I'm dumbfounded, right? Yeah. This is one where you're not just scratching your head. You're like, well, how do I defend this? So I listened to one of the arguments that the defense attorney made, and he said, well, there was a key in the barn. They could have got out. It was a misunderstanding. I'm like, if you look at the police report, it said the kids had sores on their feet, looked like they hadn't bathed in a few days, hadn't been fed. I mean, I won't say it's not defensible, but it has to be a serious defense and a reckoning to try to figure out how you can defend this situation and ensure that they don't go to jail. Because based on what I see right now, they're going to prison for a long time.
How can the everyday average person defend this without being racist, prejudiced, or just don't care about other people besides the people that look like you? If a lawyer is openly admitting that these people are most likely going to go to jail for a long time and he wouldn't even know how to defend this, how can the everyday average person get in my comments or anybody else's comments and try to defend actions like this? Try to defend people who in 2024, when people say that racism doesn't exist anymore and this happens, who targeted children, black children, to make them slaves. And he kind of alluded to them kind of knowing the laws, so they moved to West Virginia to avoid. These people knew exactly what they're doing. And I want to also point out, look at them. You wouldn't think, you probably wouldn't think, you might look at them and say, okay, they're not probably the biggest fans of black people, they probably don't have many black friends, but you wouldn't think that they're trying to be basically slave owners. That's not what you would think when you seen them. But this is what is happening. This is real. And this also, man, is what happens when you are not around. Yes, people think of adoption and think that someone just willingly gave their kids because they didn't want to, they couldn't raise them, they were too young or whatever. But a lot of times kids are taken because parents aren't doing what they should be doing. And the kids are neglected. So they're going into foster homes. They're being put up for adoption because of the parents not taking care of them. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. And that's what this podcast is all about, men. These children had a father. Where he's at and what he's doing, God knows what, but he damn sure ain't on his job. Because your children, some of them were placed in a barn with sores on their feet, living like slaves back in, 100 years ago. One was in the house being, probably being mistreated just as worse as the ones in the shed out back. If you're a father, if you have any kind of sense and care for children of, I don't care what color you are, this is disgusting. And also, it's also just as disgusting as people who will act like this this is a single incident. No, it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. Just like the reporter said, how can this still happen today? Still happen today because people still have this type of mentality. Still have this type of mentality that black people, black children, black people are lesser than. And as long as that mentality exists, this type of thing will continue to happen. And that is this episode of the Raising Karter podcast, a podcast that is facilitated, structured, directed towards men, fathers. And if you got any value out of this episode, check out our podcast. Check out the playlist that we got of all our videos, season 1, season 2. Now we on season 3, and I'm out of here. Peace.